So in today's presentation, I've chosen to research the effects of early childhood neglect on brain development. So the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services have stated that in just the U.S. alone, each year there are over 600,000 children that are victims of abuse or neglect. We've learned in class that the early years are very important for for a child's brain development, and experiencing neglect or chronic neglect during this time can have very long-term consequences on their emotional, behavioral, and mental health. So in this presentation, I'll go over what is neglect, how does it affect brain development, what are the long-term consequences, and what we can do to change the outcome. So what is childhood neglect? Neglect is the absence of care. It means not being able to meet the children's physical, emotional, educational, or medical needs, very basic needs. And during this critical time period, the first 5 years of life, critical for brain development, the key areas in your brain that are developing is your prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, amygdala, all parts of the brain that are responsible for logic, self-control, emotional regulation, and chronic neglect can lead to fewer neural connections, as we've learned in class. Your chronic neglect can actually make your brain get smaller. There's a reduced in size of your prefrontal cortex, and your amygdala can be very overactive, which, when in charge of emotional regulation, it can lead to constant anxiety later on, aggression, and in fear. So because those areas are affected, these kids that are experiencing neglect have a higher risk of having anxiety, depression, PTSD, and behavioral aggression in life. They have a harder time regulating their emotions. They have a harder time later in life forming secure relationships. And all this combined, it can delay their cognition, their cognitive development. They perform worse in school because of the reduction in the prefrontal cortex. They might have a harder time paying attention or problem solving. So the case study that I really liked to look at was Mr. Bruce Perry's. He compared the scans of 2 3-year-old children. One was normal and one that was experiencing chronic neglect. And it shows you that your brain does get smaller if you're experiencing chronic neglect during this time period. And the biggest takeaway from his case study that I love to put here is that nurture matters just as much as nature. We learned about the debate between both, and even if you're disposed to have a better brain architecture, having that environment that's not stable and full of neglect can actually worsen your development. So what can we do to prevent neglect? Mr. Walter's study was really great in identifying that we as a society, the general public, us as educators, healthcare workers, it's very important that we're able to kind of identify signs of neglect, because the earlier we report this and intervene, it can really drastically change the trajectory of that neglected child's life. And some things we can look out for is the child withdrawn? Is he withdrawn emotionally? Is there delays in their cognitive development? Do they have poor hygiene? And it's very important to do this because children might not say something, might not report something. So UNICEF, this is more on a global scale. UNICEF has partnered with and started a bunch of programs in over 130 countries today to try and advocate for and improve parenting, nutrition, mental health, and early learning for children in these different countries. Their initiatives are focused on childhood development, early childhood development, supporting family-based care, trying to reform child welfare systems, and reducing institutionalizations. So as we've discussed today, we know that the very early time period for a child's development is very important, and experiencing neglect, chronic neglect, can have very long-lasting terms and change their brain architecture very drastically. So we know that the brain can be supported and helped and healed when they're nurtured, if they've experienced neglect. So it's important for us to recognize signs early on, report it early on, and respond accordingly in order for us to save children's lives and change their lives. Thank you.